When we set out to design our acoustic systems, we had one goal in mind: to achieve the most honest and lifelike sound possible. That's why we use a minimum of components with as few elements as possible in the signal path. In other words, no crossover. In the ATMO model is there a capacitor for the tweeter, and that's used solely to protect the tweeter. It's a first-order filter with a slope of 6 decibels per octave. No more coils, no resistors, nothing else. Neither in the ATMO model nor in the PARALLEi model. The PARALLEi model doesn't even have a capacitor. That's how far we went to achieve the most coherent, phase-coherent sound possible, because it's this inherent phase coherence that is responsible for realism and holographic reproduction. Even when we added a capacitor to the ATMO model, we only had a 6 decibel slope per octave. And even then, we still had to invert the phase on the tweeter, switching the polarity in order to compensate for this phase shift. Even with such minimal interventions, it happened, so we had to bring back that holographic, three-dimensional quality to the soundstage. That's why we inverted the phase. Question: what does an open baffle provide compared to a conventional speaker? Well, it's the freedom of sound. Imagine sound that isn't trapped inside a box. There's absolutely no compression of the sound, no compression of the driver from inside the enclosure. In other words, it's just an incredibly breathing, open sound. This sense of presence is exactly what the open baffle provides. In addition, you no longer have, well, I emphasize, major problems with neighbors who might be bothered by your bass, because there won't be any excessive bass pressure building up in the room. It doesn't have time to accumulate. It dissipates more quickly, and that's naturally thanks to the absence of a box. That's why with these studio monitors, including these, we position them as studio monitors. You can work with them even in untreated rooms, among other things, because the bass response is simply amazing. Every detail we use here has its own purpose. Starting from the uniformity of materials, for example, paper cones, fabric surrounds, or a paper cone, fabric surround, and silk dome, as in the ATMO model. All of this is done to achieve, naturally, that uniform sound in addition to phase coherence. It's very good when the sound wave, is reproduced by materials that are more or less the same in terms of their origin. This really sounds more organic, more harmonious, you could say. We paid a lot of attention not only to the quality of the copper conductor in our internal wiring, which you can see the one we used. We paid a great deal of attention to transitional, very small details, various pins, tiny contacts, those with silver plating in the middle, and so on and so forth. But what surprised us the most at one point was when we started using rhodium on copper plating. Something truly profound and unexpected happened here that completely and fundamentally changed our long-standing, deeply ingrained perception of our complex acoustic systems and how we inherently understood and perceived them, altering our understanding of sound and hearing. I mean, there appeared such punch, such roundness and smoothness in the high frequencies and analog quality that it was probably the biggest surprise for us recently, and we encountered this effect almost at the final stage. Here's the question: why without a crossover? A crossover is essentially a sophisticated dividing filter, which, yes, what exactly does it do? It meticulously takes the incoming sine wave signal that is coming into the amplifier, the already amplified audio signal sine wave that is then going directly to your speakers, and precisely splits it into distinct frequency bands. Do you see this layering? It's like mincing it up, turning the audio signal's sine wave into mince. Filters are always a compromise. There are always losses, including electrical ones. That's why, of course, we tried without any error if it's passive acoustics. And of course, we tried to manage. The idea itself was this, the concept was this: one full-range speaker that is maximum coherence, and for that the absence of filters, including even digital ones, because digital filters are also processing. And we are for analog sound processing that you can actually hear on these speaker systems. We'll come back to this later. This also applies to Class D amplifiers and other nuances of digital to analog converters. This is a very interesting and deep topic which we will cover in future videos.